Support for this podcast comes from Invent Together. I bet you didn't know that inventing activity by Black inventors peaked in 1899, and it has never recovered. Black and Hispanic college graduates patented half the rate of white college graduates. That's just one of the reasons why you need to know about Invent Together. When our patent system gets more diverse, our nation will get stronger and more successful. Find out how you can help diverse inventors and unleash economic opportunity at inventtogether.org.
This is the Dan Le Batard Show with the Stugatz Podcast.
Chris and Billy have some shower content, some important shower content that we will get into in a second because it is being alleged around here that Chris Cody is playing a dangerous game when it comes to showering. Another dangerous game is being played by Aaron Rodgers. Adam Schefter and Aaron Rodgers, the story around him, he was talking to Chris Collinsworth. They had an interesting back and forth where Collinsworth was just saying, if I'm the Packers, I tell him, go ahead, retire. I'm not trading you, even though it wouldn't help the team any. And Schefter was making the argument on behalf of Rodgers. And one of the things that he said is Aaron Rodgers needs to get some more mud on this as way of advice. And I would argue that no, he doesn't need to get more mud on this so that we could feed for content for days on this. He can handle this the way that he pleases, just like Adam Schefter handled it the way he pleased by putting the mud on the hands of Aaron Rodgers the day of the draft. Aaron Rodgers has sat this out publicly. He's not putting any mud on it, and we'd just feed on the mud if he gave us it. It would just make us content for days. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about before we get to the shower content is what it is that's happened with Richard Sherman. If you've seen what's on the news, in jail, felony, no bail. If you've heard the 911 call, his wife sounded really scared. It was horrifying, talking about hanging himself, apparently, according to the reports, drinking way too much, maybe a hit and run situation. We don't know how much damage was done there, but the 911 call was a panicked wife talking about her husband in a way that she said was behaving out of character, but was a dark glimpse into the life of Richard Sherman. And the thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about, because I'm willing to wait for more information on this, but Richard Sherman is a symbol now. Richard Sherman has been one of the guys for a long time in that league who has been a leader on a defense that was super strong for the Seattle Seahawks, turned himself into a superstar in a sport where all the bodies are disposable. It's hard for a position player that, a cornerback to be a famous dude. He did it with his voice and his excellence, both of them combined.
And not just that, a Compton resident that went to Stanford, bet on himself numerous times throughout his pro career, and really an inspirational story.
I don't want to make extrapolations because I don't know what's going on in his life. But the thing that it made me think of is sometimes the guy that I think is best equipped for whatever the end of his career looks like, whether it's Robert Smith or Ricky Williams or John Amici, guys that I think, Shane Battier,
right,
are super equipped to handle whatever happens right toward the end of your identity dying.
The transition will be smooth for them. You think it's going to be smooth?
I never think it's going to be smooth for any athlete. I'm just telling you there are certain guys I think are better equipped for it than others, or I've thought are better equipped for it than others. But Robert Smith was throwing up in a bucket next to his bed drinking alcohol all morning because of the loss of structure. He's a free agent. I don't actually want to make extrapolations. I don't know what's going on in his life. But the only thing I wanted to talk to you about is I wonder sometimes if the smartest of the guys might actually be less equipped because they keep looking in the places as opposed to the guys who aren't looking in the places, and ignorance is bliss. I've told you the story before of Billy Beane, 5-star athlete, first-round pick, sitting in a dugout, overthinking things so much while Lenny Dykstra sits next to him, just pounding a bat on the dugout floor. Billy Beane knows he's about to face Steve Carlton. Lenny Dykstra doesn't. And it's easier to be Lenny Dykstra and not think about these things. But later in life, Billy Beane becomes an executive and Lenny Dykstra becomes Lenny Dykstra.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's going on in Richard Sherman's life, neither do you, but I found interesting that this guy is one of the symbols for against all odds, coming out and being a smart and distinct voice and a confident voice. And I'm listening to a 911 call about how he's thinking about hanging himself. And his wife sounds totally panicked. And it was startling to hear. And again, I'm not saying that there's a link there. I'm just saying that I wonder always with athletes how hard it looks at the end for you when you see your career mortality and you begin grieving it.
In the absence of more information, because you're right, he does appear to be one of those guys, or did appear to be one of those guys where he had it figured out, kind of post-career figured out. I'm not saying he wouldn't suffer at all, losing his identity, all that stuff.
And he's just a free agent, by the way.
I mean, he's the VP of the Players Association. Like, I'm with you, Dan. I thought he had, like, all of this figured out, would be one of the guys where the transition would be a bit easier, but it speaks to just how little we know about what's going on in these guys' lives and how they're feeling towards the end of their careers.
It was a too honest glimpse into what might be going on there, because I had my reservations for even listening to it, because I kind of felt like that was a real invasion of privacy. My takeaway was the 911 dispatch officer, because you said, I thought Richard Sherman's wife was quite calm, not panicked, given the circumstances, and holy shit, that dispatch operator was really infuriating.
Not helping matters, being super rude. A woman is watching her husband, and you don't know. Look, man, it can be anything. It could be CTE. It could just be drinking. It could be a mental break. It could be a psychotic break.
It could be a really bad day, too.
It could be any number of things, and now it becomes like this is such a difficult thing, right? Because he has got a target on him. He is a loud voice. And this, what you're listening to, this glimpse into his life is so dark that when you get to the despair of your wife talking about hanging himself, I don't believe, no matter how cursory our glances can be at these guys, no matter what the packaging and mythologizing and the commercialization is, I don't believe any of us had Richard Sherman's life being in that place, even by accident, even alcohol-fueled, even depression-fueled. And it just goes to show you again and again that you don't actually know much of anything. Because hang yourself, Stugatz. Like, that guy gives off a pretty extraordinary confidence about just where he is in life.
Right. I had a hard time imagining what actually happened. He didn't hang himself, but I had a hard time imagining Richard Sherman putting himself in that situation in the first place.
You don't know. Well,
right?
You don't know what somebody's family situation is. You don't know how many complications there are. We just don't know much of anything. This glimpse doesn't get you to see more of those details. It just becomes more confusing.
All we know is what's going on professionally, which is he's a free agent, probably staring down the barrel of his career possibly coming to an end. So we can make all sorts of assumptions that maybe that's a contributing factor, which is also unfair.
I think that fans underestimate what you've just said, that, you know, when you're the aging cornerback who is unsigned, facing your identity sort of running away from you, it adds to whatever stress you may have internally. And we learned this lesson with Naomi Osaka in women's tennis. Mental health issues are invisible. You don't know them until they're spoken about. And if there's any inner frailty to Richard Sherman or anyone else, these things happen. You know, they're behind closed doors. They happen because we hear the police report or see hear the 911 call. You know, I have great sympathy for anyone, including professional athletes, who are going through stuff like that.
About a month ago on this show, we aired an interview with Josh Norman that wasn't very good. And Stugatz, in some ways, to me, was enormously disappointing because I remember the specifics of how Josh Norman came into our life, where he's in Carolina, he says things. He's free, he's unafraid. The team is trying to change him. Ron Rivera is saying, you need to tone all this stuff down. He says, I'm not as good a player if I tone all this stuff down. And Josh Norman was so fresh that I'm like, you remember, right? We're doing it on ESPN radio after game, and we're like, whoa, football players don't just come on the radio and do this not rehearsed. And then I'm talking to Josh Norman at the end of his career as he's a free agent. And it was not the same dude. The system had changed him. And then as soon as we stopped taping.
Broken a little bit?
Not broken. Himself, again, not doing the rehearsed thing of I'm auditioning for my next employer. Just all of a sudden himself again and almost apologizing for what it is that we just did, because somewhere within the pipeline over 10 years, he realizes, yes, when I'm fast as everyone else and I'm young, I could say whatever I want at the height of confidence and I could be the guy. And then the system breaks me slowly and slowly and slowly. And then all of a sudden at the end of my career, when I'm not that fast, and the last play you remember is Derrick Henry stiff-arming me and I got to get another job. I got to be the person who's out here publicly talking about things the right way. I can't be myself anymore. I'd like to be employed next year. There's another young cornerback who's 22 who doesn't come in talking a lot, might be a little faster than me. I need to be a different person in public. It's not honest.
Right.
It's just the person who's auditioning for his next job by doing the job interview here on the radio as opposed to doing the job interview when he gets with the team.
That sport, above all other sports, I believe, it's just so cruel where it goes so quickly. It happens so quickly. Like baseball, basketball, you have time. You can plan a little bit. Udonis Haslam's been sitting on the bench for the last 7 years. Football, when it's done, it goes, and it goes quickly, and sometimes guys just don't have time to plan out what's next for.
That's interesting because I can very much imagine that Josh Norman is acutely aware that at some point he has to go from being the diva, loud cornerback with all the skills to being the savvy veteran who's going to be the great teammate. The nurturer.
It bummed me out so much to talk to him, Stugatz, because I remember when we were done with him the first time as he's coming in, we're like, please don't change. Please don't change. And the interview we did was with someone who was being really careful. And I was like, Richard Sherman throughout his career has been himself. Like he has been.
Well, his situation has changed. I don't think maybe that's the guy, right? I think the guy we got right after the game is Josh Norman, correct? But I think his situation has changed where he has to act differently.
I mean, at that point in your career, they bring you in for a locker room presence, and you can't necessarily be the distraction that you were once in your mid-20s as Josh Norman. You have to come in and be like leader guy.
Richard Sherman, they denied him bail. Like, I don't know, right, Stugatz? We've talked. We've had a lot of fun. We've made fun of guys, like when it's the synthetic weed, when this behavior is so out of character that you've got some athlete doing some weird thing to avoid drug testing. But now you don't have to do the synthetic weed anymore. The details on this, I don't believe this story caught because Richard Sherman is super famous. I believe this story caught because this could happen to any number of cornerbacks, and it wouldn't be the story it is today. It's because Richard Sherman is a symbol for something. Richard Sherman, at the center of that defense, found his voice, an adult voice, strong and black and proud, and that defense went against Russell Wilson because there was a company man feel in the reporting between Russell Wilson and that defense. Russell Wilson's still there in charge of that team. The defense is splintered. They won the championship because Russell Wilson was cheap and they could pay for that defense.
But, Dan, at that position, it's nearly impossible to become a household name. He did. Richard Sherman did. Deion Sanders did.
He was the face of one of the greatest defenses of all time.
And voice.
Yes.
Yeah. More importantly.
And now you see what you got yesterday, and I wonder how much of that gets erased because you get the honest look into 4 minutes of despair. You get an uncomfortable look into the deepest of the privacies. His wife represents him. That is a strong couple. And you're listening to a 911 call, and I don't know about you guys, but I was like, whoa, hanging himself. Yeah. Like, where are you in? And the mind goes to so many places, CTE and drinking and pain relief. And did you see the reported details on the amount of liquor being consumed?
I saw 1 bottle of vodka, 1 bottle of Hennessy.
Man, gee.
So what's happening there?
We got insight into what is someone's deepest, darkest public moment. And I don't know if it's necessarily fair to Richard Sherman to draw the conclusions we are now because, look, you're not afforded the opportunity to look at my own personal deepest, darkest moment, and I'm so grateful for that. Because we're here talking about Richard Sherman for 25 minutes like we know him and we just know what we've seen.
It is uncomfortable to hear a 911 call like that. You feel like a voyeur, like you're hearing something that is so intensely personal and private that it shouldn't be out there. I mean, I recognize Richard Sherman is a celebrity and a public person, but still, can't that be private?
It's not so uncomfortable that we don't, most of us, listen to it right till the end.
It kind of lent to the magnitude of the situation, though, right? And what was going on. I mean, it did. Like, if you just read it without hearing that call, I don't know if you know just how drastic or dire his situation
Hung
is.
himself.
Yes.
Talking about hanging himself is
Correct.
something that is going to get your attention. This is just a handful of the guys from that defense, but Earl Thomas and Michael Bennett and Richard Sherman have now had really uncomfortable public moments, and I don't know what playing defense that way does to the body and mind. We have ideas, right? But
Just playing defense in general.
Well, just playing football in
Right.
general. But again, that by the standards of the violence in that sport, that defense was a menace.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Brandon Browner, who was the cornerback opposite of Richard Sherman for a lot of the Legion of Booms run, is presently serving 8 years for attempted murder.
I didn't even mention him. I was mentioning Earl Thomas having his bad public incident during the pandemic. It is a sport that will ravage your body and mind. And as Stugatz was saying, we'll do it quickly. We'll do it where your lifespan can get short. Richard Sherman has had an unbelievably long career. You've heard the cliche for a long time, Cody, of NFL stands for not for long. Mm-hmm. You can grab your identity in the gladiator sport across a few years, and it can be empowering, and then you've got your rest of your life to stare at, and you've got maybe mental pain, and you've got physical pain.
And we know enough about CTE now, and we've seen enough evidence where anytime something like this happens, there's an assumption of a link. I mean, you just assume that there's something going on up there related to football, right or wrong. That's an assumption now.
When you get to this kind of darkness, a 911 call from a panicked wife, when you get to this place, is my husband going to kill himself? You got to keep in mind the desperation that you're listening to. I don't think that Richard Sherman, under normal circumstances, given everything that you've seen happen in this country with black people, wants to be inviting the police over to his house. You've reached a level of desperation when you're shouting to a 911 operator, I think my husband's a harm to himself here. Like, I really don't know whether or not Richard Sherman was going to harm himself or others, but that is how you end up in conservatorship, in mental illness, in alcoholism, in depression, all of those things, because I don't believe, based on what I know of that family, again, she represents him. I think she's his agent. She knows what's at stake and cost with their career when she invites the police into their life.
When she calls 911, right? The level of desperation.
What was that?
It was me just being me. When she calls 911, the level of desperation there, you're right. I can't imagine knowing what she's inviting into his and her lives.
The scrutiny and the police.
Right.
Yeah, and you don't want this to become public for you as individuals or as a couple. So for you to make that call tells you the level of desperation.
Trying to say 911.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah.
911. Lips got stuck together. I don't know what happened there.
Drink some water, man.
Something happened. Yeah, it happens. Tahoe, Moderna. West Coast, East Coast. I hit a shot off a champagne bottle. It was inflatable. It cost me 100 yards on my drive. I mean, dispensaries, one every block. Jesus Christ. Gummies. There was an earthquake, too. I'm all right, by the way. Wife still rattled a bit. Had to leave early. Those dispensaries, though. Oh, my God. The gummies. Oh. Snuck a few home. I shouldn't say that on the air.
You probably shouldn't.
No, I probably shouldn't. Sorry I did. I'm not really that sorry that I did. I had one last night. 9-run starting to make more sense.
Dan Le Batard.
Earlier in the show, the question was asked, what would Stugatz do with one invisible day?
Stugatz.
One day where he could be invisible. We decided that during banking hours, he would choose a weekday. He would rob all the banks in the universe from 8 to 5. And then at night, he would alter sporting event results by being an invisible man in games he had bet on.
This is the Dan Le Batard Show with the Stugatz.
Robert Federici is with us now, and ProPublica is a nonprofit publication that investigates abuses of power. And I'm always telling you around here that the business reporting in sports really stinks. It's terrible. But this article he wrote is legitimately infuriating. So Robert joins us now. Thank you for doing so. So explain to us, or explain to the audience in layman's terms, if you would, what is happening here, because I was surprised to read that Ballmer is paying a tax rate of 12%, while LeBron is paying a tax rate of 36%. I thought that LeBron would also have the creative accountants.
So, neither of them is violating the law. They're actually both following the law, just as it was written by Congress. The difference is that the tax code favors people who own assets over people who essentially work for a living. And so the most significant point in that disparity, I think, is not just is Ballmer paying a lower rate than LeBron James, and Ballmer makes a lot more money than LeBron James. He's also paying a lower rate than Adelaide Avila, who is a concession stand worker at Staples Center and makes about $45,000 a year, including her second job at Uber. So I think that's the more interesting point here, because Ballmer makes about 15,000 times more than she does and still pays a lower rate.
Explain to us how it happens, okay? The piece is called The Billionaire Playbook, How Sports Owners Use Their Teams to Avoid Millions in Taxes. Steve Ballmer, did he buy the Clippers for $2 billion because it's just spillage to him that he can write off? All of it.
Yeah, so I'm not in his head, but the tax advantages are massive. He is able to write off almost the entire $2 billion purchase price. And the reason that is the original theory was that the assets that compose the Clippers are losing value over time. So we're talking the TV deal, the player contracts, the franchise rights, sort of similar to the way it's thought that parts in a factory lose value. But the difference is, in a factory, they do lose value. In a sports team, as we know, these things automatically regenerate and typically grow in value. Nonetheless, he's able to write them off as if, their value becomes zero and it's a loss.
If you had to guess why it is that all the rich people want to get into sports, the primary reason, is it love of sports? Is it that sports teams don't depreciate in value? Or is it the thing that you're writing about?
Gosh, that's tough. If you're talking about Steve Ballmer, I know it's clear that he genuinely loves basketball. But if you look at his quotes around the time he bought the team, he was certainly talking about the financial motivation as well. And if you look at, sort of quotes from owners historically, they've certainly cited the tax advantages.
What is it about the Ballmer scenario specifically that the audience would be most appalled by? Do you have anything in your reporting that is more appalling than the idea that you could just tuck away all of your sports team joy in losses and end up with a 12% tax rate because you've arrived at a place in wealth that makes it that kind of galling and disproportionate what the difference is between you and the people who work for you?
So, one of the things that defenders of this tax treatment say is, look, he gets to write off the whole $2 billion, but if he sells the team, he has to pay it back. But even if he sells the team in that instance, he's getting an interest-free loan over years, decades from you and me, the federal taxpayer, and he can use that money to massively increase his wealth. Now, if he dies, or if any owner dies while holding the team, as many do, and the team goes to an heir, those taxes never have to be repaid. And the heir can restart this clock of writing off huge losses. In fact, we in the story, we write about an heir who inherited a stake of the Golden State Warriors. And guy's in his 20s, and what he said to us is, I can't believe my luck. I'm a lucky SOB, is what he said. And that's just the way the tax code is written. They are not doing anything outside of the law.
Can you explain to us, because the problem isn't with Ballmer. Of course he should try to do that if he's got that kind of money, if you could take advantage of the system. But can you give us all the other examples of places that Ballmer could have invested his money to arrive at the same sort of break that he's getting by owning the Clippers?
So, I mean, you make an interesting point. Like, let's say he had invested in a widget factory, right, for $2 billion. He would have similarly been able to write off almost the entire purchase price over 15 years. But in a widget factory, the assets that you're writing off are the thing that makes the widget, the conveyor belt. I'm making things up here. The fleet of cars that deliver the widgets. Those things actually break down and lose value. So it's a real cost. With the sports team, player contracts, players only have 30 teams they can play for. There's no risk of players not signing with your team. TV is going to continue to air your games. The TV deal is not an asset that's going to disappear. In fact, it's going to grow in value. So that's the point we're making with the story, that the economic reality with this tax system is very detached from how the sports business works.
Given the amount of money that Ballmer traffics in, are you telling me basically that he gets to have the Clippers for free?
Well, look, I mean, it takes 15 years to do all the write-offs. So that's sort of a complicated calculation. But I am telling you that over the course of 15 years, he is able to write off the entire thing from his taxes. And the amount he'll save on his tax bill will ultimately be hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars that would have been in the public coffers, paying for the military, paying for social safety net programs, paying for everything the government pays for, that the government will not have the money for, that money for, because of these write-offs.
Hundreds of millions of dollars, you say, but I'm going to ask you again. If Steve Ballmer, through creative accounting in 15 years, or the Ballmer and the state or anyone else, if we're able to look back on all of this, and the greatest part of the scam is not only did he get a team we thought he was overspending for at $2 billion because Donald Sterling was rewarded for racism. And not only are reports now that an expansion franchise goes for $2.5 billion, so he got a bargain at what I thought was overspending, and a lot of people thought was overspending. But furthermore, you, business reporter expert, 20 years from now, are we going to be saying Ballmer got to have the Clippers for free?
So it's not a tax credit, right? It's a tax deduction. So that means that he gets to ultimately lop $2 billion off his taxable income and not pay taxes on those $2 billion. So whatever the rate is, that percentage of $2 billion is what he doesn't have to pay for. If you're asking if he's going to ultimately make money, be in the net positive when this is all said and done, it's hard to imagine that he won't be, because these team valuations keep skyrocketing. He's getting this massive tax break. And like we talked about, the assets that he's getting the write-offs for are typically not losing value. It's a good deal generally.
Robert, I know Ballmer's sort of become the face of this story, but you get into it with how Dan Gilbert's exploited some of these tax loopholes, and David Tepper, who in watching CNBC is really respected as one of the great financial minds. And the narrative around owners is you buy professional sports teams because they're playthings. It's not really a sound investment. You don't get into this business to make money. That's a narrative they sell to fans. But David Tepper is not going to make a bad investment. It seems as though what is supposed to be a plaything is actually a really smart way to get around some tax laws. And I think your widget comparison articulated that perfectly.
Yeah, if you look at these tax records that we've obtained without an understanding of the way the tax code works, you see all these sports teams that have hundreds of millions of dollars of losses every year. And you're wondering, is this just incredibly terrible business that all these billionaire sort of financial geniuses are getting involved in? And no, you realize that it's this amortization play that where they get to sort of take these massive paper losses that exist on paper only, that makes it look like these teams are losing huge sums of money, when oftentimes they're actually profitable, or in the event they actually are losing money, they're losing way less money than they're reporting they are to the IRS.
What is the number, Robert, that the audience who has not read the article, The Billionaire Playbook, How Sports Owners Use Their Teams to Avoid Millions? Ballmer claims credibly and legally that the Clippers lose what?
So over a 5-year span, 2014 to 2018, he reported $700 million in losses from the Clippers to the IRS. Now, in the real world, the question is, how profitable are the Clippers? Every time we've seen glimpses, or almost every time, they have been profitable in real world terms. As recently as 2017, ESPN obtained a leaked financial report that showed them profitable in real world terms. There were audited financials that came out around the time of the sale, showed a couple years profitable in real world terms. We also have Donald Sterling's taxes. He, by the time, he had exhausted his amortization benefits in his, later years as owner, Clippers were profitable. Every indication is that by real world terms, they are profitable. If they're not, it's nowhere near a $700 million loss.
Can you explain to me outside of sports how it is that we arrive at Amazon last year paying $0 in taxes?
So that's what we're talking about with sports teams is, pass-throughs, S-corps and partnerships and all of that tax burden and all of those profits pass through directly to the owner. With Amazon, we're talking about a C Corp, so totally different tax system for them. I have not studied that as closely.
Can you explain to me when you're saying real terms and tax terms? Can you explain to me and the audience how that happens? How it is that we arrive from real terms, of course they're making money, they're the Clippers, to 4 or 5 years of $700 million in losses?
So it's been a long evolution. It started in the early 20th century, with owners trying to take more and more aggressive steps on write-offs. Ultimately, the last sort of chapter in this was 2004, when Congress basically threw their hands up and stopped trying to make sports teams prove that the assets they were writing off actually had, definable lifespans, and basically allowed them to start writing off everything. The president who signed that bill into law is President George W. Bush, who himself was a former sports team owner.
It's a big, giant scam, isn't it, Robert? All of it. It's just I want you to say it. I know you wrote a lot of words and you did reporting and you did responsible journalistic things, but when you turned in your article, you thought to yourself, this whole thing is just a giant steaming pile of bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Dan, I mean, it's not my role to sort of opine on this, but this is what I'm really excited about with this series and this tax data that we've obtained. You talk to a tax expert about amortization, they all know about this concept already. A lot of them think in the context of the sports world, it's totally unfair, but they all know about it. But, the general public does not know the nitty gritty of these massive tax benefits. And, this data and this series and these stories are allowing people to sort of assess for themselves whether they think this system is fair.
Were the numbers surprising to even you?
Yes.
How much larger were the breaks than even you thought they would be?
I'm an NBA fan myself. I'm a basketball fan. I pay attention to news stories about how these teams are doing financially. I never expected to see the Clippers losing $700 million in tax terms in 5 years.
And when you started down the path of the research of this, did you have in your head some expectation? I know you like to go in open-minded and you don't want to, confirm conclusions before the reporting confirms conclusions, but did you have an idea in your head what you might find or what you expected to find?
It was actually the other way around. We were looking at the business holdings of these wealthy people, and we were blown away by how huge the paper loss figures were for sports teams. So it was actually the other way. It was the sort of story that found us, not the other way around.
Ballmer is a symbol, Ballmer is more egregious, or Ballmer is just the records that you had and you could probably find it throughout sports?
We looked at other owners as well. The interesting thing is this is the way it works for every team owner, especially every team owner that purchased after 2004. These are the rules for everyone. Ballmer is following the rules as, the U.S. Congress wrote them. So there is nothing. It's extraordinary because the purchase price is high, so the write-offs are especially high. But you look at team valuations these days, this is what, teams are going for much more than $2 billion.
Give me something else, not widgets. Give me something else Ballmer could have purchased that would have represented this tax break.
So another good comparison is, you buy a pharmaceutical company, right? And there are patents on your drugs. And those patents are extremely valuable, but they run out, right? Eventually, the patent runs out and a generic company can come in and sort of steal a lot of your customers. So the patent actually loses value in that case. It makes sense in sort of real world financial terms that you'd be able to write off that patent. But Steve Ballmer, in this case, or any sports team owner, is able to write off his franchise rights or a media deal. And as we know, the Clippers, when their media deal runs out, they just typically, or any sports team typically gets a new media deal and they're still on TV. So it's just pretty much any other type of company you point to, it's not this disconnected from how it actually works in the real world.
So you're saying this is the best deal. The best deal a billionaire can make is sports.
Yeah, I mean, you can also look at real estate, right? So real estate investors take massive depreciation write-offs. And, I think you're based in Miami, I'm based in Los Angeles. Like, as we know, you buy a house or a building, like that thing is actually not losing value. It's typically skyrocketing in value to the point where it's hard to afford it. That's another one you can point at as, the write-offs are extremely disconnected from how it actually works.
What changes this?
The U.S. Congress and the president.
No, but for real, what changes it?
What do you mean?
See you later, Robert. Thank you for being on with us. We appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you.